welcome, and we would just ask you to find your question and answer box and just note in there where in the world you are, and anything particularly that you want to ask today about the NPQLBC before we get going properly in a second. We'll just make sure that lots of people have had time to enter the room. So just a repeat of that initial request, if you could find your question and answer box and pop your location into that and any questions that you have that you want answered during the NPQLBC as we go through. Liesl, Natalie, thank you. Great start. Colchester and Buckinghamshire. We've got anything up north? I'm from up north, but I don't know whether anybody else is. Suffolk, Newport. I don't know who you are, Andy. Northamptonshire, brilliant. Oh, Copenhagen, brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. Right, so keep those coming, guys. If you're just entering the room, welcome. Just find your question and answer box so that you know where it is, because it's going to be a key tool that we use this evening. And just pop into the question and answer box, excuse me, where you are in the world. And if you have got any questions that you particularly want answered during the webinar today. I am joined by several colleagues who are going to be answering those as we go, but we will have a question and answer session at the end to make sure that we've covered everything. Okay, so we'll get going properly now. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to be working with you this evening. My name is Laura Saunders, and I'm the lead facilitator for the specialist NPQ programmes at Best Practice Network. And the NPQLBC is the specialist programme that we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm joined by a couple of fabulous best practice colleagues who are going to be monitoring the chat box, the Q&A box as we go, but I'm also, slightly more importantly, joined by Kirsty, Alison and Poppy, who are guests this evening, to talk to you about their perspectives of the NPQLBC. Poppy and Alison are ex-participants who have recently undertaken this SAT, the Summative Assessment Task, and passed. Congratulations. And Kirsty Elliott joins us as a facilitator on the NPQLBC face-to-face days. So I will welcome them formally later. But first, we are going to dive into a bit of information just so that you know a little bit about the structure and the journey of the NPQLBC and who takes it, so that you have some insights into whether it's relevant for you and how you can apply. Okay, so we just want to start very briefly by providing a little bit of clarity about the journey and the development that the NPQs have gone through in recent years since the previous iteration. What's really fantastic now about the NPQs is that they've become part of a really clear career pathway, which starts with trainee teacher and initial teacher training, then goes into the ECF and then onto the NPQs with the specialist route programmes first, which is what we're here to talk about this evening, and then senior leaders, head teachers and executive leaders. And this pathway brings everything together. It's very clear and it's a very golden thread that the government have been keen to create for progression for teachers through the sector. So initial teacher training and the ECF means that early career teachers are supported in the first 2 years of their teaching careers, as you know. The NPQs then follow on from there, and many of the NPQ content areas are threaded from the ECF, so there's a real clear progression. Everything within the NPQs are rooted in evidence, as well as collective excellent practice from within the profession, which I'm sure our guests will talk to in a little while. At this point, Jamie, would you mind just posting the NPQLBC framework from the DFE, please, into the chat box? Thank you. So Jamie's putting in now the DFE's framework for the programme. And that gives you a background of all the content areas and the learn that and learn how to statements that the programme is made up of, that we then construct a programme around. Jamie, would you mind putting it into the Q&A box as well, please, just in case it's not reaching everybody? Thank you so much. Okay, so there's a growing list of NPQs, which is really exciting, and that replaces the previous 4 NPQs during the reforms in 2020. And in developing that width of the pathway, the old NPQ ML, which many of you may be familiar with, has been replaced by the NPQ LT, Leading Teaching, the NPQ LTD, Leading Teacher Development, NPQLBC, leading behaviour and culture, and the NPQLL, leading literacy. And that provides much more choice, much more opportunity and sense of direction for school leaders such as yourselves to become better at what we do and to be able to really specialise our knowledge in order to make that really specific difference to our young people. So as you can see from the slide, the NPQLBC is 12 months long. There is no project anymore. There used to be on the old NPQML a school improvement project. That's no longer in place and has been replaced by a SAT, a summative assessment task, which I'll talk to you about a little bit more in a moment. There's also no longer any leadership behaviours in the DFE frameworks that you'll see when you look, but Best Practice Network really do believe in the power of recognising leadership behaviours and skills and values. So we have a set that are embedded throughout all of the programme, alongside the deliberate practice model, which is another way of embedding your practice as you learn. And this is very much about enabling participants to really apply new knowledge into practice as a leader as they go. And so it's having quite a lot of impact quite quickly for participants from the very beginning. There's now greater emphasis on practice-based activity and participant context. So things like practice activities and in-school performance coaching that you'll access. And it's all about applying your learning within your own contexts. Another huge difference is the domain and school-specific evidence base that the DFE have used to create the frameworks. And this is opposed to a much more generic evidence base that we used to use on the previous iterations. And what participants are finding is that this is meaning that it can have impact straight away to their practice. Okay, so I mentioned a moment ago that there's no longer a school improvement project. There's now a streamlined summative assessment task at the end of the 12-month programme. Application of learning in practice, as I mentioned before, is now the absolute focus. And in that final assessment that follows the 12 months of engagement and learning, you engage in an unseen case study scenario where your responses need to be around 1,500 words. Now, that's a much lower expectation in terms of word count than the previous iteration of NPQ assessment, but the requirement for completion is quite a lot tighter, and that now fits within an 8-day window, which Poppy and Alison, I'm sure, will have an account of in terms of their recent experience of that. What's really, really important to know is that the SAT is a pass or fail. But to be entered for the SAT in the first place, you have to have engaged with at least 90% of the programme's elements over the 12 months. If you've dropped below that 90%, we are unable to enter you for the SAT. So that's a really, really important thing to know. So it's not just about spending 12 months dipping in and out and then doing a SAT. It's a commitment for 12 months. So I hope that feels clear for everybody. So the DFE have designed the frameworks for each of the NPQs to support all of you to really specialise and based on really on your interests, your expertise, your potential expertise. And we know then that the NPQLBC is broadly for those people who lead or aspire to lead behaviour and culture and or pupil wellbeing. We may also add there and or behaviours for learning. It's quite a broad remit of the programme. So I'll just take you through now a little bit of information so that you can assess whether this is the right programme for you. What's important to note at this stage is that the DFE framework that Jamie just posted outlines what needs to be covered in the NPQ, but lead providers such as Best Practice have designed how you learn that. And our programmes have been written to be highly inclusive and really suit quite diverse needs and diverse experiences. So I'm going to take you through a couple of different participant case studies to demonstrate a bit about that range of participant contexts. And then we'll revisit that with real life experience with Alison and Poppy shortly. So this is Kath. Kath recently undertook the LBC. She's a highly experienced teacher and leader in schools. And her new role is to lead the work in her large primary team in a challenging area in the southwest of England as head of culture. The school is experiencing quite a lot of issues with pupil behaviour and staff consistency and turnover. So she wanted to better understand how to lead with a real focus on behaviour and culture, as opposed to previous lenses that she had, such as teaching and learning. But she knows very, very acutely how much that needs to be closely linked to the SDP. And she took the LBC to address that learning. This is Ryan. He works in an all-through PRU in the Northwest. He's on the NPQLBC at the moment, and his PRU is facing a great deal of highly complex behavioural needs amongst its very small student body. He has great behaviour management with the students he works with daily after 6 years in the profession, but he's now developed an interest in looking into leadership, potentially as a new assistant headship position is looking imminently available, and he wants to be able to develop his behaviour management into a whole school setting approach to leading excellent behaviour, and begin to look at developing a culture on and expectation of excellence before he applies for the AHT role. So we also have participants from all sorts of different alternative settings and outdoor schools, SEND settings, EY settings, higher education, further education, independent, international, the list goes on. My point really here, therefore, is that our participant body is hugely diverse. And everybody is at a different point in their teaching and leading careers, with completely different schools, different settings, different contexts. Our programmes are written to enable all participants to thrive, no matter if they're already in a leadership post or they're aspiring to be in one. And what's important really to note here is that this NPQLBC can also be undertaken after an NPQLT, an LTD, after or before an NPQSL. You can undertake all of the NPQs at any point, but just never at the same time. Workload isn't good for that. You don't want to be doing that. And broadly, if your role or your phase, your team, your school priority is to develop behaviour and or culture and or well-being in your setting, or behaviours for learning, then the NPQLBC could well be the NPQ for you. We'll ask a little bit more to Alison and Poppy about that later, just so that you're getting a real insight from them about their roles. Okay, Jamie, at this point, do we have any questions? And I'll take a quick pause.
So we had one question from Ruth around, she's completed the NPQSL previously, and just wondering the main kind of differences of this programme to that, and I suppose what would be beneficial about completing the LBC.
That's a brilliant question, Ruth. Thank you. So yes, you can undertake, as I just mentioned, any of the NPQs as long as you don't do them at the same time. So that's fine. It depends really on which NPQSL you took, whether it's the previous iteration or the current iteration, as to whether you'll see any similarities. With the previous iteration, you'll see very little similarity. It's a completely different programme. With the current iteration of the NPQSL, you will see some similarities, some overlaps in content area, which I'll come to in a second. But obviously they're pitched completely differently based on the specialism of this programme versus the specialism of the SL. So we would love an application from you. If you'd like to have a chat with anybody about your specific circumstances, about whether this is right for you, then we'll give some contact details at the end so that you can have that conversation. Okay, hopefully that answers.
Yeah, and then there's one other quite specific from Victoria. So she has 15 years of leading wellbeing curriculum and pastoral in her across different schools she's worked at. He wants to move towards an assistant or deputy head role in charge of pastoral. Is this kind of the best route? And again, I suppose thinking about the SL as the alternative to that, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to depend on your specific context right now, Victoria, but certainly your experience how long and what you've been doing sounds perfect for the LBC and could be a massive support in securing an assistant or deputy head of pastoral. We can't guarantee that, obviously, but we would do everything in our power to support you. Equally, it might be that looking at the SL is an alternative option for you. So I would recommend having a look at the DFE framework for the NPQLBC that Jamie's posted, and then find the NPQ one as well, and just compare the two. And I'll show you a little bit more about the content areas in a second, and that should help you about programme structure a little bit.
And I suppose one final kind of bit that Laura had to go into. I mean, I'll answer this other question from Anonymous, but you know, you've spoken a little bit about the types of people doing the programme, and we have a real range of different experiences and roles that people do this, don't they? And just to reiterate kind of the stretch, you know, people are in an assistant head role already, you know, they may be doing different things to someone who's only been teaching 3 or 4 years.
Yes. And it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong for you, essentially. So as I mentioned about Kath on the screen, she's a really experienced teacher. She's been in it a long time. She's an experienced senior leader, but in a new role as head of culture, she decided she wanted to look at that. So for Anonymous, assistant head in charge of behaviour and attitudes, it does look about right. Yes, to answer your question, I think it sounds really, really well pitched. But again, have a look against the NPQ SL just to see if that's more appropriate for you. But it does sound very appropriate from what you've said. And Will, it's not a silly question, but I don't think you are in the right place. No. Jamie, do you want to just support Will offline? Thank you. And Niall, you currently don't hold a pastoral role, but have a good deal of experience as a house head, which I'd like to extend and build on. Is this suitable for me? Yes, because I imagine there's a lot of pastoral elements to your house head role. Again, have a look, Niall, at the DFE framework, and I'll talk a little bit about the content areas now, which should answer some of those questions, to see if that does it for you. And if not, check in again at the end and we'll come back to you. Okay. Right, I shall move on. I'll show you a little bit about the structure of the programme and how it's made up based on the DFE's framework. So, in designing the NPQs, the DFE created 10 content areas, which are big umbrella areas that have a lot of content statements sitting beneath. And those statements are either learn that statements about new knowledge or learn how to statements about new skills. And this slide shows you a little bit about those content areas and how they fit across the specialist programmes, but also compared to the leadership programmes for those of you who are considering SL as well. So the first table on the left shows you the specialist programmes. And as you can see, they each cover very different content areas relevant to their specialism, but they all cover teaching, implementation, and professional development in some format. And they're the ones highlighted in the bold text, just so that you can see where those links are. Again, that's really important for that golden thread of that career pathway. The second table on the right shows the leadership programmes, and that's, again, just to compare. And you'll see that all of those cover all 10 of the content areas. So you'll see that the NPQ LT covers 9 of the content areas. The LTD has 4 and the LBC has 5. Don't be fooled. Just because the LTD and the LBC have fewer content areas than LT doesn't mean anything different about workload or rigour. It's the same amount of rigour involved and work involved in all 3 of those programmes. So I hope that feels okay. So if anybody has experience of the LT and they're thinking, oh, the LBC will be a breeze, it's different. So crucially then, we've structured all of our programmes, both leadership and specialist routes, to cover all of the content areas that they need to cover, offering flow and cohesion through bite-sized activities. And at every point, participants carry with them what we lovingly call a leadership development record, an LDR, which tracks progress and ensures relevance for every participant as individuals. And they work with a nominated in-school performance coach who will support you in applying your learning throughout the programme. So underpinning all of these content areas is a really strong and clear evidence base and resource list that I mentioned earlier from the DFE, and those are in each framework. And we have linked these to really specific school practice that's presented to you throughout your programme online and in the face-to-face events to really exemplify what those content areas look like in practice. It brings them alive, it gives them contexts, and gives you the opportunity to challenge yourself then through various different kinds of activities to apply them with relevance to you in your schools. I mentioned flow and cohesion a minute ago. And this group of content areas has guided the way the programmes have been structured and designed. So as you can see, this slide gives you a timeline of the approximate hours your programme will take over the 12-month period. And all of best practices NPQ programmes follow this cyclical approach. The induction cycle gets you started, and then you're followed by cycles 1, 2 and 3. And those three main cycles all follow the same structure, starting with the face-to-face event where it kicks off the learning for that cycle. Then it goes into some online learning and practice activities where you start applying everything you've taken on. Then you undertake a formative assessment task, which is again applying in practice, but in a bit more depth than the practice activities, and very much in the style of the SAT, the summative assessment task, to start preparing you for the language and the approach of that. And then you have an in-school performance coaching session where you discuss your progress and you complete your LDR and you upload that. Prizes for anybody in the Q&A box who can tell me what LDR stands for. And then you can see at the end, you have an impact review with your online leadership mentor and your in-school performance coach, followed by the summative assessment task case study. Okay, are there any questions coming up at this point about structure? I don't think there are. Jamie, I will take the anonymous question though at this point. I'm a class-based primary teacher, no leadership responsibilities, but have career progression in mind. Is this suitable for me? Yes, it is, anonymous. The specialist programmes are all designed to be appropriate for anybody that has completed the first 2 years of teaching and is going, I want to do some leadership, but I don't know what. But we would encourage you to compare LT, LTD and LBC so that you're really confident on which one you want to take first. So I hope that answers your question. Kelly, great question. Do you choose your own coach or is it SLT? We would advise you to work with SLT to decide who is best suited to that. So it depends on your role, who you are, how you work with your SLT, etc. But I hope that helps.
On a similar vein, sorry, yes. Laura, jump in. At the start, someone asked about in-school performance for coaches or in-school performance mentors. Could you just do an overview of what that is? Of
course. So in-school coaches, in-school performance coaches are selected by you and your SLT within school, and they are the people that support you with the practical application in your setting. They're the ones that know your school like you do and can support you within the setting. The online leadership mentor is provided by Best Practice Network, and you won't actually necessarily meet them until the end, but you will have a lot of feedback from them online and you'll have a lot of support from them online, and you go to them about anything to do with your programme, your tasks upload, your feedback or anything like that. So I hope does that answer the question that came up, Jamie? Great. Yes. Okay. And Liesel, great question. Is the programme more suitable for primary or secondary? Both, Liesel, both. And like I said earlier, also HE, FE, EYFS, international, independent, PRUs, other alternative settings, SEND settings. So it is genuinely appropriate for all of those phases and contexts. Can you have a coach not based in your school, Jenny asks? Possibly, yes. And I think we've probably got a few like that. The coach needs to know your setting. That's important. So if they're not in your school, if it's somebody within your trust, that might make sense. If it's somebody, a separate coach outside, arguably they won't be able to help you apply quite as well. It's very much about performance coaching as opposed to other types of coaching, Jenny, if that helps. Okay, so I'll take some more questions in a second, but I'll keep moving for now, if that's all right. Thank you for throwing these questions out, everybody. They're really, really good, very helpful, and you won't be the only ones thinking about them. So just a few stats for you. So take of those what you will on the screen, but most importantly for me, the bit on the left. It's about our values. It's what we stand for. When you are choosing a provider for your NPQ, it's really, really important as a leader or as an aspiring leader to be considering the values and the approaches through which that provider operates. We're here at Best Practice to get the best leaders for all children, no matter where they are in the world, and it is extremely important to us. It genuinely guides everything we do. And the NPQ work will support your professional learning through the programme, and more importantly, ensuring that you're even better leaders at the end. And it'll do it through the values. We work together, we inspire your learning, we really do act through integrity, and we always strive for excellence. And what we always hear from every participant is how well supported they feel on the programme. So hopefully that's something, a little bit about us, to know why we're so great, essentially. Okay, so just a bit of background knowledge about geography. NPQs are delivered in partnerships with teaching school hubs, MATs and other school groups across England. Whilst we can't guarantee that the face-to-face events that are facilitated by local school leaders are always very, very close to you, that you can see the approximate geographical spread of the events currently. And so we're hoping to keep those the same. You can see they're widely spread. So you will have one really near to you, hopefully. There's a growing number of international partners delivering the NPQ face-to-face events as well. The majority of them are delivered remotely. Do use the contact details at the end of the slide deck if you'd like a bit more information about international context. I know there were a couple of questions popping up, and Jamie could answer a couple of questions on those later. Okay, so I'm really keen to get to our guests now. I'm joined by Alison, Kirsty and Poppy. Kirsty is a facilitator on our NPQLBC programme, and Alison and Poppy recently successfully undertook the SAT. Congratulations. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really looking forward to sort of hearing your perspectives, your lived experiences of what the programme has been for you. Firstly, Kirsty, could I start with you, please? As a facilitator working on the LBC, what were your highlights of the programme, and what feedback have you had from participants?
So highlights for me personally have been actually seeing the delegates changing their perspective. So based on the research, looking at what's going on in their school, and actually having some moments of where they're talking with each other of, oh, actually, I thought this, now actually I'm thinking this might be a more appropriate route or a more appropriate way of dealing with things. It's been really good to see how they've worked together, how they've supported each other, taken ideas from each other and from the course itself. And the feedback we've been getting from the delegates is that having the opportunity to talk to the facilitators, but also to talk to each other and talk about the research has really supported them understanding what works well in their school or what could work well in their school. As we have the same delegates in all three events, what's been really lovely is watching their confidence grow in terms of how they talk. If they're not part of SLT, they talk to SLT, how they able to take ideas forward and already start to have an impact in the school. Even in just small ways in the classroom or whole school approaches, and really thinking about what they could be doing better and the impact they're going to have on their pupils, also pupils moving forward. So that, for me, they've been the real highlight of facilitating for the course.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That was so good to hear about the benefit that participants have been finding in that collaborative working, the networking, the sharing ideas, but also that sense of growth of confidence, a sense of perspective, seeing it in different ways, and sense of themselves as leaders as well as practitioners in other senses. So I really appreciate that, Kirsty. Thank you. Okay, so can we go to Poppy and Alison now? I'll start with you, Poppy, if that's all right. Could you just tell us a little bit about your role first, and then what the most impactful pieces of learning on the NPQLBC have been for you?
Yes, of course. So I am currently an English teacher in a very small secondary school in the northeast of England, so it's a very deprived area. However, I find that whilst doing the NPQLBC, so many of the statements, so the learn how to learn that statements, were so impactful in the sense that I could use them in my classroom. I could literally go to the training and the next day I could use them in the classroom. So that was impacting not only of my understanding, my behaviours and my learning, but also you could see that in the pupils as well. With that, I think it's such a vast amount of research that you cover all the way through it. So being able to understand, you know, if I'm looking at staff well-being, pupil well-being, looking at behaviour, additional needs behaviour, or reasonable adjustments, I've been able to cover every single bit of that learning, and then thought about how it could impact my setting mostly.
Brilliant, Poppy, thank you so much. And it's really struck me actually what you've said about I could literally pick up those statements and take them into the classroom the next day. So, and it's having an impact on not only your leadership practice, but your classroom practice as well. Fantastic, thank you. Alison, so could you tell us a little bit about your role then and what the most impactful pieces of learning on the NPQ LBC have been for you?
Yeah, will do. So I'm a pastoral care manager, designated senior lead. In a primary school in Birmingham, central of Birmingham. What I found really powerful for us was looking at how to manage children with complex behaviour needs. It looked at how you can have flexible consistency, so you have reasonable adjustment without lowering your standards. And it was really insightful to learn how to accommodate children with special educational needs or other barriers to learning or emotional needs. Really love the fact that it looked at how to build a culture by design and not let it be by default. So bringing everybody on board, it really helped me with confidence in approaching people and gave me the knowledge to back everything up I ever put in training. So it was really a powerful tool for me because it just expanded my knowledge and let me spread it across the school to help us improve our whole school approach.
Thank you, Alison. And do you know what? That's so interesting to get some real insights of very practical things. You know, you talking about flexible consistency, reasonable adjustments without lowering expectation and standards, and talking about culture by design and not by default. And that's a really, really important part of leadership, an intended culture for how you all work together. And in this case, in terms of behaviour and culture. So brilliant. Thank you so much. Very, very powerful. So back to you, Kirsty, if that's all right. Have there been any commonly arising questions from your NPQ LBC participants?
Yes. So the biggest one at the start always is I am not in a level of responsibility to change what's happening at the culture of the school, or my SLT is not approachable. How do I go about approaching them? And then, or maybe it's not the priority in school, can often be one as well. So that's really interesting because we often then have conversations, and really good conversations within the group, that are there about, well, for starters, they've agreed for you doing this course, so it is a priority, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But also about how do we approach them, how can we instigate those initial conversations, and then actually what we find by the second or the third session is that they've started to make inroads and make real progress in that. And then the question changes to, it's not consistent. How do I make this consistent across the school? This is something we're looking at. How does it become part of the culture of the school, so that we can overcome barriers within a team, maybe where one person is not willing to step up or change their approach, and so we can do some work and some coaching within the session together as a group on, or actually what can we do, what's worked in our schools, what's worked in different settings, how can we approach that. So they are the main sort of questions that we get around the NPQLBC.
Thank you, Kirsty. I hear a lot there about empowering the participants within those face-to-face events to be considering, well, how are we going to get around that? And then what I'm really hearing is that as their confidence grows and their knowledge grows, the questions change because they're empowered to be leading in a different way. That's really interesting. And I'd like to come back to Poppy and Alison then about what the impact has been from the NPQLBC on you to date. Alison, can we go to you first?
Yeah, we've literally did a whole new behaviour policy that we launched in September. So I actually launched it while alongside doing the NPQ, which was exciting. But I've had extremely good feedback from all the teachers. I mean, I've got some quotes from a questionnaire I did with them. Behaviour has greatly improved. The one I think that resonated with me was that they said, especially with the explosive outbursts, and that was looking at the complex behaviour needs that we had within our school and looking at how we can adjust our whole school approach, but make it accommodate for everyone and include that flexible consistency, so without lowering our standards. We had this, most of the time it's good. We've also implemented coaching within the staff, so we're working with our staff, not against them. We're taking on ideas, feedback from them. I find it really useful, and my biggest thing is it's given me the confidence, the knowledge, and it's also been really good to back up everything I'm saying with evidence. So that's what I've took on board and brought to the table.
Wow, I'm not sure we can argue with those impacts. That's incredible. Thank you.
Amazing.
Really
Really
that. So Poppy, you, what about the impacts for you?
Truthfully, I think I must have been one of Kirsty's imaginary pupils in hers, actually, to be honest, because I was that person. So at the start, I was like, I would never be able to go and speak to SLT about this. Like, what place do I have to speak about behaviour? You know, I'm just a classroom teacher, you know, I'm not an SLT. However, starting being able to go through the course and, you know, having that evidence and having those conversations and, you know, inputting all of my data and analysing the data in our school, I've then been able to go to SLT and say, I think this is what we could do moving forwards. I think this would have a larger impact on our pupils. So my confidence has totally grew with it, really. I have now started working with our head of behaviour in our school, and there is now a role open around senior mental health lead in school and associate assistant head in regards to behaviour. So there are roles and responsibilities that I'm starting to move towards, but I just know that before this course I would never have been able to access that or even myself towards it. So yeah, so I have now been able to have those conversations, start that training. I am running some staff wellbeing around, you know, how we can deal with our own wellbeing, how we can lead it to our pupils, using questionnaires, starting to do the training. So I think overall, for my personally, it's impacted on my confidence, but it's also really, really developing my career progression, and I couldn't have asked for anything more, really.
Wow. I said beat it, Poppy. I'm not sure. This is amazing. So the impacts I'm hearing are hugely practical for you both. There's been serious shifts within both of your schools in terms of behaviour and culture, but also in your own practice as leaders, but all your own confidence also. This is huge. Brilliant. Okay. So Kirsty, then, can I come back to you just finally to ask? We saw earlier a little bit around the input about participants coming from lots and lots of different kinds of roles and pathways into this NPQ. In your face-to-face events with the people that you've worked with, what have been the roles and the reach of some of them, just so that we can get a bit of a gauge?
Okay, yeah, so I sort of tried to write down the different people we've had. So it's been a real range of people. We've had people who are, say, in their third or fourth year of their career. It's been people who work in a college, people who work in the secondary sector, people who work in the primary sector. We've had delegates from SEMH schools, from alternative provisions, taking part in it. And we've had people who are on senior management teams or senior leadership teams. We've had people who are the Senko coming on, and because that's part of their role. And it's been a really wide reach. I mean, and from a personal perspective, we're actually looking at putting our assistant vice principal on the course next year, who is lead for behaviour, and she's got the NPQSL already under the old system. But we're looking at putting her on the course. We did actually also, from our perspective, have a person in mind who's a third-year teacher who actually wants to improve their understanding of behaviour and culture. It's one of their areas of development. We were looking at putting them on it as well. So from a school perspective, because of the input I have through facilitating the course, I was planning on putting 2 people at extreme ends of the career on the course. And I know the question came up about, is it primary or is it secondary? We predominantly get secondary in our cohorts, which from a primary perspective, and I'm a primary head teacher, I think is a real shame, because actually, and this is a bit where I said I get passionate, I talk a lot if I get passionate. If we can't get it right in primary, it's harder for secondary. So actually, I think we're underestimating the power of primaries and the importance of behaviour and culture in primaries if we're not, as head teachers, in a different perspective now, as head teachers put input on the NPQLBC. I've seen firsthand from the facilitating side the impact it can have for different ranges and different schools and settings. And I think it's really valuable that more primary schools are getting involved in it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kirsty. That's so helpful. But not only the breadth, but the importance in terms of your leadership values of looking at LBC topics early in the age groups. That leads actually really nicely to Louise's question in the chat box. She's a new primary head across a federation of 2 schools, and one of her teachers is about to finish her 2 years as an ECT. She's really keen to develop a clear route, a clear role for herself, and behaviour and culture seems ideal. She also thinks the LBC would be good for her as well. And I think they're thinking of doing it together. And she said, this is a great question. If we both do it, do we each need a coach, or could we share one, e.g. our current SENCO or behaviour lead? Louise, it is completely up to you how you want to do it. It's going to depend on capacity and workload. So if that SENCO behaviour lead has capacity to be the in-school performance coach for you both, absolutely, and that could bind the direction of the school. What we would encourage you to do is, if you do have the same ISPC, in-school performance coach, is to ensure that you contract lightly when you're working with them, to keep the conversations separate where they need to be separate. There is a really kind of ethical part around being able to come back to your in-school performance coach as a participant and have that conversation that may impact on the other person that's also taking the programme. So just sensitivities, I guess. And lots of schools do it in different ways. And it might be that Kelly's question answers the bit about capacity, Louise, for your SENCO or behaviour lead. Kelly has asked, does the coach have to do any work? Thinking on their workload, as I have a current teacher who would probably take on this role. Great question, Kelly. We're actually working a lot with ISPCs at the moment to iron this out, to really clarify it. The role they have is to facilitate support for you, and for you to be enabled to just put my teeth back in, for you to be enabled to take accountability for your own programme, for your own application in practice. And they don't have to touch any of the paperwork. They don't give you any formal feedback. They give you feedback within in-school performance coaching sessions, but you write that up on the template, the LDR. So there are currently several ISPC sessions throughout the year, and we're just looking at adjusting that at the moment. So there will be a couple of mandatory and a couple of suggested ISPC coaching sessions throughout the 12 months. So it's light for them, but they are there to facilitate and to support. So I hope that answers, Kelly. Okay. Thank you so much to our guests. I really, really appreciate everything you've said, and I hope that you could hang on for when we get to the question and answer section in case there's something that would be really useful to come directly from you guys. So thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to invite Jamie now to speak to a couple of slides before we take the final questions.
Great, thanks, Laura. So a couple of, as Laura said, a couple of quick slides on the funding aspects and how to apply. So since the new NPQs were reformed, they've been available through full scholarship funding across England. I'll put my teeth in, as Laura says. And so if you are a state school funded by the government, so MAPs, local authorities, it also includes independent special schools, then the cost of your NPQ is fully funded, so there's no cost to you. If you're an independent school or based outside of England, then there's a cost to undertake the programme, which you can find on our website, on the best practice site there. In terms of types of support funding as well, it was interesting, as Kirsty mentioned, around more primary schools being able to undertake NPQs. And going into this year, the Department for Education have put a number of policies in place to support schools that are either small or are rural and remote. And in that instance, it's generally been more difficult for them to undertake the programs because of the time out of school, having cover, etc., etc. So on the right-hand side, you can see that state-funded primary schools with 1 to 150 pupils receive a grant payment of £800 for undertaking this course. Primary schools with more than 150 pupils receive £200, and then smaller secondary schools or state-funded 16 to 19 settings will also receive £200. Now, it's worth noting that the Department for Education have announced these schemes in place until the end of this academic year, especially on the scholarship side. And at the moment, it's unknown how that will look going into 23-24. So our recommendation is, if you want to take part and you want to make sure you get the scholarship funding, is this academic year is most certainly the time to do that. As we go into September 2024, it might not be possible and funding may not be in place then. On to the next slide, Laura. So the next intake commences in October, and our application windows are open at the moment. So if you go onto our website, so www.bestpractice.co.uk/NPQ, you can see all of the programs that are available at the moment. We also have obviously our international intakes that have a slightly different webpage, so make sure you apply on the right links. Once, in terms of the process, you can apply fully straight away. You'll then need someone in your school, and they're designated to call the sponsor. We'll need to approve your application, and then we'll review what you've submitted to make sure that you're applying for the right program and you are indeed eligible. And sometimes, we may, suggest you look at other routes, and that's when there's, we can support you as well to make sure you're doing the right course at the right time for your career. Before applying, do discuss with your head teacher or your CPD lead. Make sure they're on board with, with the course that you're undertaking. And again, just to ensure that you are doing the right course and that that's in line with their plans for you in their own succession planning or with their own school plans that they're up to. If you require anyone at Best Practice and you need any help, we're available on the phone. You can find our number on our website. We've also got an inquiries mailbox where we can answer any questions you have around course criteria. And also on our website as well, we have a live chat function that some of you may have used previously. So really, however you want to get in touch with us, we're able to talk with you on any of those methods. And yeah, we've got a team of people who are on hand to help with whatever you might need. And then with that final bullet point, we've been doing this for a number of years now. We all know September is when we get, everyone always applies in September, and there's always a bit of a mad rush towards the end. So do apply over the summer term, and to avoid that rush, we only have a certain number of spaces. So the sooner you apply, the sooner you can guarantee your place on the programme. And we're enrolling people right through the summer holidays. So the sooner you get started, the sooner we can get everything confirmed, ready for October.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. If anybody has any questions based on anything that Jamie just mentioned, do get them into the chat box. There was a question about funding, but I think because Jamie answered it quite directly, I've moved that on. We do have one question, which I think is brilliant. And I'm really glad you've asked this. So it's to Poppy, but I would also like to put it to Alison as well, if that's all right. Poppy, how did you find the workload of this course on top of everything required as a class teacher, please?
Right, okay. Thank you for your question. No, I actually found it rather manageable. I know that there's difficult times in the year when things start to get a lot heavier, a lot busier. However, because it is in so much, like, so your 3 face-to-face days are spread out across the year, so you can almost plan towards them, and they learn how to and learn that statements. So if you go with the course, obviously you'll start to realise what they are. They're structured in a way that you can almost focus on which statements that you are looking at, and each LDR is able to be sectioned with your in-school coach, so everything can be an organised session. So my advice is, as long as you're organised, the workload is totally manageable. I'm currently doing another course with the DFE at the moment for mental health alongside when I was doing this, so I'm probably not the best person to speak to, but I would honestly say just keep it organised, and that would be the best thing to do.
Thanks, Poppy. Yeah, it is a lot about organisation, isn't it? And we have purposefully designed the programme to be in bite-sized pieces. And if you've organised the days and the in-school performance coaching sessions, those bite-sized pieces fit quite nicely. I spoke to a participant at an event a couple of weeks ago, and he said he genuinely thought that signing up would increase his workload. And he's genuinely been surprised at how it has decreased his workload, because he's gained more capacity extremely quickly whilst being on the programme. So I hope that also adds to that question, Anonymous. So thank you, Poppy. Alison, do you want to add anything to that about workload?
The only bit I would say is that you do in bite-sized chunks, because I would, if you gave it me all, want to do it all straight away, without a doubt. So the bite-sized chunks really worked for me. It held me back and made me take my time, and it made me learn better, to be fair. So yeah, really manageable.
That's really helpful, Alison, thank you. And I think just to support that, Anonymous, we are at Best Practice extremely aware of workload for teachers. And at no point do we feel that it should be added to, it should only be taken away. And if we can build your capacity through this programme to be able to do that, then more the better. Another aspect of the programme is the pastoral side of the care that the online leadership mentor gives, as well as your in-school performance coach. And that they do offer that support. So we do have the flexibility every now and again, if Ofsted come or something happens in your family, or there's some extenuating circumstances that mean you need to go, I just need a quick pause. It can all happen. There's a lot of flexibility. And so that you don't do what Alison does and we wanted to do, and start it all at the very beginning and do that flexible bit all the way through. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we have a question, Jamie, from Victoria. This is a great question. When you have made an application, how long does it take to get an answer, please?
So once you've applied, once your sponsor or your school have confirmed your application, then within sort of 3 to 4 working days at the top end, generally it'll be quicker than that. So it's a very fast process in terms of coming back to you. If you're not sure where your application's up to at the moment, then the best advice I can give is to get in touch with us, drop us an email, or use the online chat function, and we'll let you know.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie, were there any questions that you answered by typing that formed any themes that would be useful for us to mention quickly?
You've got me on the spot there, Laura.
Yes, sorry. Maybe we've gone through them all, actually.
There was a question around the relevancy of, so you mentioned earlier that further ed participants could undertake the programme. So my response was that, that it's primarily focused at running, schools 4 to 18. However, we do get participants outside of that.
We do, and we get a lot of them, and they are successful and enjoy it and get a great deal of their settings. So like I said earlier, lots of people from lots of different contexts. So hopefully that helps. That's a great question. Thank you. Okay.
I think that's it.
If there's nothing else from anybody else, I can't see any other questions coming up. I want to thank Kirsty, Poppy and Alison for joining us, for Jamie and for Chris for supporting the call, and wish you luck and ask that you get those applications in the summer term. And we look forward to seeing you on the NPQLBC in the autumn term. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening when it arrives.